So I will introduce Hugo Slim, who will speak in English. Hugo has a PhD on humanitarian ethics in war, which he accomplished in 2002, but he started as a humanitarian worker already in 1983, so that's a very long time ago. He doesn't look that old. With Save the Children Fund in Africa, then he worked with the UN Emergency Office in Ethiopia, and apparently an old friend from those times is here tonight. Then in the 90s, he developed a multidisciplinary Masters in Development and Humanitarian Practice at Oxford Brookes University, so something quite similar, but I think done in a more dynamic way in those times, at least, than what was done here at the same time in Geneva. And then he worked from 2003 to 2007 here in Geneva at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and during those years did a major applied research project on protection of civilians and published a very well-known book on this research. He's currently researcher at Oxford University and will give us a kind of broader perspective on this issue of perception of humanitarian action. Hugo?
First, I want to congratulate Caroline and MSF Suisse on a fantastic book, which I hope you will all read and buy and learn from. I hope it's being sold outside. Good.
I'll get to that, not outside. But
So congratulations to MSF, and particularly to Caroline, who I remember seeing at the beginning of this project, and for carrying it out in 11 countries with her colleagues, and an extraordinary achievement. Listening to whatever 11 times 600 people is a lot, and that is to be commended. But also, amazingly, and you may not know this, but she also made another great achievement during this period of maximum stress and managing an 11-country research program and working at MSF. She gave up smoking at the same time. Now, I think that is extraordinary. I think giving up smoking in MSF is a bit like being in Italy and having to give up pasta, or being in Switzerland and having to give up cheese, or being in England and having to give up delusions of grandeur. So I really commend you for that. I think that's terrific. It's also the second time in a month I've been commending Médecins Sans Frontières on a book, because also last month in English, the earlier book from MSF Paris on negotiations was published in English. And again, I have to say that both these books are incredibly important for their openness, their transparency, their confessional nature, in a way. And I really applaud that. I think it's incredibly important in our profession that we have people opening their doors, opening their windows, and showing what people say about them, the decisions they make. And of course, that is one of the things in this study. People want to understand more the decisions humanitarian agencies make. So, twice I'm commending MSF. I want to try and do three things this evening in my 10 minutes. First, look at some ethical perceptions that emerge from this study. Second, to look at a couple of places where people have found MSF incoherent and coherent. And then finally, I want to look at the religious dynamic. Andreas and I are both theologians originally, I realize, and so we cannot leave religion out of it, and it takes a big place in this study. But first, I want to look at the title of the book, In the Eye of Others. And I just want to put that in context at the moment, because, of course, to see oneself from the eyes of other people is incredibly difficult, and it's incredibly important, and it's very challenging to do. And in a way, it is this new buzzword of our age at the moment. It's all about empathy. And it's about trying to take the perspective of the other person, to stand beside them and see how they see you and how they understand you. And this is a challenge for each one of us as individuals in our private lives, in our working lives. But of course, it is, as humanitarians, a really profound challenge for us to appear in somebody else's war or somebody else's disaster, and to stand there and really think, what do they see when we appear? And that's why, again, this study is so important, I think. And we have to ask and imagine and understand what people think. And then we have to try and improve and correct and explain ourselves. But again, as Caroline's study makes clear, they are not always right. So sometimes we have to correct them as well, because we can all bring prejudice and other things to our eyesight. But the message for all humanitarians is that we should always try and do this. It should be a core part of our profession, as Andreas has also said, this dialogue between us and people we are aiming to work with. And of course, there's a very famous French philosopher, a French Jewish philosopher who makes this really the center of his œuvre, and that is Emmanuel Levinas, who talks about being face à face avec l'autre, face to face with the other, and what that encounter means. So that is the challenge that MSF has taken on, and they have delivered some important results. I want to look at a couple of those. First of all, ethical perceptions. Impartiality. I was delighted and relieved, as Andreas is as well, obviously, that this really important principle of all the principles, more than independence, more than neutrality, impartiality is the principle that people really get. They really understand impartiality. And that is incredibly important for us to know, because, of course, impartiality is, where in Geneva, is Jean Pictet's favorite principle. It is his favorite because he always says, if you do impartiality, if you operate impartially, you are automatically being humanitarian. So by doing the second principle, you meet the first principle. So I was really happy to hear this coming from people, that is the principle they understand best. The other thing that's a very important message from people in these countries, in these 10 countries, is this message: share and explain your operational choices with us. Explain the decisions you take from the dilemmas you have. And this is people saying, don't be afraid to be ethically accountable. Don't be afraid to be ethically transparent. And this is incredibly important for us too. We often feel we have to hide our ethics, make our decisions, and then act. Actually, people want to understand why we are doing things in their country, what choices we made, why we leave, why we stay, why we talk, why we stay silent. They want to understand, and we need to bring them with us. And I am sure if we bring people with us in our ethical accountability, we will have a much greater humanitarian movement in the world. And then the third thing I wanted to look at is medical ethics. And again, I was excited in this study to hear people seeing themselves as patients, of course, but not seeing themselves as beneficiaries simply, and more in MSF's work, seeing themselves as people involved in their treatment, active in the health of their community, and having rights to health. And that was a very important message too. Just a couple of things where people found MSF incoherent, and it's a very interesting part of the study, the whole question of Médecins Sans Frontières. In fact, people, as Caroline has suggested, felt that MSF has many borders. They find they only work in this country, they don't work across the border very often, which makes no sense. They find they have borders of vertical programs where they are just doing tuberculosis or they are just doing boils in Cameroon and things like this. So there is incoherence sometimes, but you have so many borders, you're so limited in your intervention, and geographically and technically. The other way they have borders is in their compound, as Caroline mentioned, that sort of chinoise syndrome in Cameroon, where people live in compound. They have very strong borders around these team houses, which is partly security, but these messages are strong. But where they're very coherent, where people found that Médecins Sans Frontières made a lot of sense, was that they are a single sector agency. And this came through the study strongly, that because they are medicine and health, this is very readable, lisable. It's very clear to see. And compared to those terrible British Anglo-Saxon humanitarian organizations who muddle everything up and do agriculture, water, health, economics, MSF is much simpler to see. And that is a virtue as well, which is good to hear. But finally, in my last minute, I cannot resist talking about religion that comes out in the study. And I am so delighted to discover something that I always knew, which is that MSF is, in fact, divine. It's a huge thing that comes out of the study that people see MSF as, and I quote, people sent by God. Well, I mean, I knew this. I always had a hunch this was true. But now we have it confirmed by many, many people who really feel, and this is another quote, God is not far away. He has descended to earth to help us and give power to MSF. This is incredible. And of course, it's really powerful because this is people, and most people in the world are religious. This is people talking from a religious idiom and understanding humanitarian action as from God. Unless it's just MSF. We'll have to check that with the other agencies, whether it overlaps. But this godness that MSF has in people's eyes, this godness, has, and this is a quote again from the study, a positive effect on the image of the organization and its acceptance into the tissue of society. So being seen as sent by God, as divine, is a good thing for MSF. Shocking as it may be to the atheist socialists Saint Ronnie and Saint Bernard Kouchner, would be very shocked to feel that they are, in fact, sent by God. But people experience them. And I think this is important. And I think, if we're truthful perhaps, there is divinity in every true humanitarian act. And that's why we think it's universal. And we could say, amazingly, that heaven touches earth in Médecins Sans Frontières in the way it works. And this is how people see it. And therefore, that is the best compliment a humanitarian organization can have. And it's the best perception that anyone could have of impartial humanitarian action. So congratulations, MSF.